It seems like I hear that all over the place lately, social media and everywhere else, and that's really nice. I mean, so we are enough unless you just don't feel like enough. And what does that mean anyway? You are enough. I mean, I think what it's supposed to mean is that we are worthy just as we are. And I think that's accurate, but if you don't feel worthy, if you don't feel like enough, it doesn't really matter. And I've kind of likened this to a little seed. I mean, don't look at a small seed that you're about to plant and get upset and go, seed, why don't you have roots yet? And you put it in the ground and you wait for it to grow. You don't go over and say, well, how come you haven't become a sprout yet? You grew your roots, but how come you haven't grown into a sprout? And once it becomes a sprout, you don't get upset that it hasn't become a shrub yet. You know that it's going to grow in its own due time. And so will we. And we need to allow ourselves that time. But sometimes in that process, we just don't feel worthy or like we're enough yet. And so I want you to go look in the mirror. And the proof that you are enough at this point in your life is that you're there. You're obviously enough to get yourself to where you're at and maintain yourself where you're at. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy with yourself or with your life, but you are enough to sustain yourself to where you're at this point. So you're also enough to get yourself moving and get to at least begin making some changes today to make yourself some better tomorrows and start feeling happier and better about yourself and about your circumstances. So how do we go about making those changes? And I like what Warren Buffett suggests. He says that in any area that you want to improve in life, start hanging out with people that are better than you in that area of life. And you will naturally begin to drift in the direction of their success in that particular area. Whether it's finance, of course, with him, it could be our health, it could be relationships, whatever it is, start hanging around with people that are better than us in those areas. And you'll discover that people that look for people that you trust and that you admire. And those people typically tend to have three qualities. And that is they tend to be accepting people. They don't talk down about people, they're just accepting. And secondly, they're trustworthy and they're dependable. And so you want to begin developing those qualities and you'll begin becoming somebody that you feel more comfortable with and that you trust and admire as well. Okay, and the way to begin developing those three qualities is just look at them first of all a little bit closer in the people that you're watching. And that doesn't have to be, by the way, in person. You're watching here on social media, so obviously you watch this kind of video on YouTube. But any kind of social media, anywhere you can pick it up externally, it doesn't have to be one-on-one with somebody. But to become an accepting person, for instance, think about somebody that you feel accepts you completely. They're not judging of you. They don't talk down to you, and you really need to stop doing those things yourself. Stop being so judging, stop being so harsh, and talking down to yourself. And to the opposite, you want to be supportive of yourself the way an accepting person is. And secondly, the quality of trustworthiness. And then we'll talk about dependability. And I want to make a clarification because trustworthiness and dependability sometimes can be easily confused. Now, I'll give you the example of, we'll say a plumber or a handyman can be very dependable. Maybe somebody's got a good reputation of being very dependable. That doesn't mean that you leave your key to your house at the front door and say, I'm not going to be around, go ahead and help yourself in and take care of what you got to take care of. Maybe if you knew them a little bit better and you developed trust, but the fact that they're dependable does not mean that necessarily you would trust them. Trusting, the quality of being trusting comes from being safe. We trust somebody that we feel safe around. And we want to develop that quality in ourselves by doing things for ourselves that are good for us on a regular basis, on a daily basis. We trust somebody that gives to us, that loves us in ways that we can't give back, so that we know that they're completely unselfish and that they have our best interest at heart. So you want to begin showing yourself that you have your own best interest at heart in subtle ways that build you up, and you begin to feel trusting of yourself. And then thirdly, dependability. You want to make promises to yourself and then keep them. But we tend to do that, or a lot of times we do that on a yearly basis. For instance, we have New Year's resolutions where we make these big elaborate promises to ourselves, and it's really much easier to break them down into little bite-sized promises. For instance, let's say that you're wanting to improve your health and you've decided you're going to start running or you're going to start walking. Maybe instead of keeping your walking shoes or tennis shoes or whatever you're going to use, keeping them in your closet, maybe keep them at your front door. Or maybe keep them in your car so that on your way home you can stop off somewhere on your way home from work, stop off and go for a walk or a run or whatever it is. So you want to take little steps to begin developing this reputation of dependability with yourself. So you want to become accepting, trustworthy, and dependable to yourself, and you'll naturally start feeling a lot better, and you'll notice that people that you trust and admire tend to have those qualities. So how do we develop those qualities we've just covered? And let me turn my notes around here. So getting back to we are enough. So when we're not feeling like we're enough and we're not feeling worthy, it might help to remember that when you popped out as a naked little baby, just like any other little baby, you are worthy of love and acceptance and love and nurturing just because you are. We don't look at a little baby and say, hey, what are you going to do to earn this? No, a little baby is loved just because you exist. And we don't lose that value as adults. We carry that value with us throughout our lives. And if we remember that a little bit, it makes it a little bit easier to remember that we need to be accepting of ourselves because we have at least that basic value. And what happens, though, is that we tend to get a little bit undermined sometimes throughout our lives, and we undermine ourselves. It begins when we're very small, depending on the love and the nurturing that we got or didn't get very early in life. We began to learn how to esteem ourselves. And if we haven't learned to really develop a love and esteem for ourselves, then it can really make us begin feeling throughout life like we're just not worthy, we're just not enough. And maybe not in our whole area of our life. I learned, for instance, in myself that, I've tended to be very confident in most areas, but I've discovered little subtleties along the way where I felt a little bit unworthy. I didn't feel quite like I could meet up to certain things. And, it really caught me by surprise because I thought I was a very confident person. And this begins to happen when we're very, very young, in our pre-toddler years, or as we're moving into toddler years. We're learning from our parents, depending on how they talk to us. Now, we might have very loving parents, but you weren't born with a manual, and they may have said things, they may have treated you in certain ways and done certain things that might have undermined your self-confidence, might have undermined your self-esteem and the way you feel about yourself in ways they never intended, and that maybe you were never aware of because maybe you did have loving parents, or maybe they weren't so nurturing, and you just you noticed that in them right away, so you know what the problem was. Before this light. Sorry for the interruption. The self-esteem is just so important that it's important for us to delve into it and understand, not because we want to know if our parents messed up with us or not, or what's going on, or because we even turned into bad people or anything, or really troubled people, but our self-esteem can really help us so much, and it can hurt us so much, that it's important to really understand what's going on inside of us and how it got in there, and to be able to make little subtle changes in ourselves. And it's very easy to do when we begin to understand it. And there are two books that I really encourage you to look into, and I've owned them forever. They've both got a little bit of water damage, but here you go. This one's TA for Tots, and I found this, it's actually written exactly like it says, it's written for tots, but I found it to be incredibly useful. I read it as an adult, and in a very basic way, covered some stuff about when we grow up, and I highly recommend it. You ought to look into it and get it for just a few bucks on Amazon. And the other book that I wanted to mention with you, all equally weathered and very beat up, and you see the inside, I work my books over, but I've learned a lot from this one. It's Risking by Dr. David Viscott. And I encourage you to get that. He talks a lot about early childhood development. He's a child psychologist, and I think. And but anyway, look him up. It's really a good read. It really talks a lot about the subtle ways in which we grow in those very formative years, in early toddler years. And I think you'll find it useful. And we're going to begin talking next week about self-esteem, get a little bit more into that, and maybe a little bit of some of the things that I've learned from these books. We'll touch on it in a little more detailed way. So thank you for hanging in there with me. I know I stumbled through my presentation again, but I promise you I'm going to do what I can to keep getting better. And if you liked it at all, if you think you got anything useful in spite of my delivery, any useful information, maybe if you'll push the subscribe button down below, I'd appreciate that. And I really would appreciate your comments. I know I had to stop a few times. I'm not good at editing, so I just pause it. But let me know where I could do better in my delivery. I would really appreciate that. And if there's something you'd like for me to get into a little bit more, mention that. And if it's a topic I'm familiar with, we'll go ahead and cover that. Okay, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next week.